My hands shook with anger as the woman outside my door fumbled with a ring of keys, insisting she had the right to come inside. She claimed she enforced the neighborhood rules, that every home here was under her control. But when she finally called the police to back her up, she had no idea her entire scam was about to unravel in front of everyone. How did a quiet community fall under the grip of a fake compliance officer? And how did one retired engineer, with the help of his neighbors, expose a con that had already stolen tens of thousands of dollars? This is the story of how a neighborhood bully disguised as an authority figure pushed too far, and how her downfall turned into a lesson in standing up against fraud. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in February, the kind of morning where the air felt sharper than usual, almost cleansing. I was in the front yard, setting up sprinklers for a small garden I had been working on. That garden meant more to me than just flowers. It was my way of honoring my late wife, keeping her memory alive. With every new bloom, the quiet moment was exactly what I needed. But the sound that broke at the sharp click of heels on the sidewalk was the first warning that peace was about to vanish. She came striding toward me like she owned the entire block. Perfectly pressed suit, leather binder clutched against her side, and a shiny badge glinting in the sunlight. Her movements weren't casual, they were calculated like she'd rehearsed this entrance in the mirror. Even before she opened her mouth, I could tell this wasn't a friendly neighbor dropping by. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan," she said with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm Alina Vargas, your neighborhood compliance officer for Willow Creek." The title rolled off her tongue as if it carried weight. She flipped open her binder with practiced precision, revealing glossy documents, charts, and forms that looked official enough to fool almost anyone at a glance. On top was a thick packet with bold lettering, Willow Creek Standards Guide. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she continued smoothly. "I'm here to ensure every property meets our community standards. Unfortunately, your home does come with some unresolved matters left behind by the previous owner." That was her opening strike. She laid out the supposed debt like it was casual small talk. $350 in back fees, plus a mandatory $250 monthly moving forward. And then, almost as an afterthought, she slid in the demand that set every alarm bell ringing: master key access for quarterly inspections. I watched as she shifted her hip just slightly, drawing my attention to the jangling belt of keys. She carried 10 of them in total, each identical, each stamped with the same hardware store shine. They weren't professional locksmith keys, not even close. To me, they looked like props. But Alina wore them like a badge of authority. Years of work as an aerospace engineer had trained me to see details others missed, and something about her entire act screamed off. I asked questions, simple ones at first. Where was the HOA charter filed? Who were the board members? What year was it established? Her answers were slick, but hollow. "All filed with the county," she said, waving a manicured hand. "I'm just here for local enforcement, not one concrete detail, not one document with real legal weight." Still, her performance was convincing enough for anyone who didn't know to look deeper. She had the binder, the badge, the smile, all the makings of authority without the substance. And as she spoke, I noticed how her words always circled back to the same points: fines, compliance, control. She even gestured toward the other houses, like a real estate agent showing off a finished development. "We've done remarkable upgrades here," she boasted. Every home in sight looked eerily uniform: identical beige fences, matching black mailboxes, white stone borders that stripped away any personal touch. "Our improvement initiative keeps property values high," she added proudly. But to me, it didn't look like improvement. It looked like forced conformity, a neighborhood stripped of individuality. I didn't realize it at the time, but this was only the surface of her operation. Alina wasn't just bluffing. She had already spent months weaving her scam into the neighborhood fabric. And while I was still sizing her up, a familiar voice broke the tension. From across the yard came Agnes Wilkins, my 72 neighbor with a teacher's sharp memory and a tone that could cut through steel. She walked right up, eyes narrowing at Alina. "Meeting Alina, are you?" she said, with a trace of warning hidden in her words. Alina's smile flickered for just a second before she excused herself, marching off with her binder hugged tight like she couldn't risk it being seen up close. That brief encounter had left me uneasy. But Agnes, she already knew far more than she was letting on, and what she revealed next would completely flip everything. I thought I understood about this so-called compliance officer. That first meeting with Alina left me rattled, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions too quickly. After all, moving into a new neighborhood always comes with some learning curve. Maybe she really was part of some obscure HOA setup I hadn't heard of. Still, something about her polished pitch, the binder, and those useless-looking keys kept scratching at the back of my mind. Later that day, I sat down with the packet she had handed me, the so-called Willow Creek Standards Guide. It was thick, almost overwhelming, filled with glossy photographs of perfectly staged yards and spotless driveways. The pages laid out rules on everything from the height of fences to the color of mulch, even dictating where a mailbox should be positioned. And then came the threats, hidden behind neat legal-sounding language: fines for non-compliance, escalating penalties, suspension of neighborhood privileges. But what privileges? There was no clubhouse, no pool, no shared amenities here. This was a regular suburban street, nothing more. The fine print buried halfway through the guide was what made my jaw tighten. Article 12. Master Key Access. It stated that residents must provide full key access to their homes for quarterly inspections. Failure to comply meant immediate penalties, and in emergency situations, entry could be forced. Forced entry. By who? A woman with a leather binder and some store-bought keys? It was absurd. And yet, the documents looked professional enough that I could imagine someone, especially an elderly resident, giving in without question. That evening, as I mulled over the guide, I remembered Agnes's sharp tone earlier. She clearly knew something. The next morning, while watering the garden, I saw her coming down the sidewalk, clutching her phone like it was evidence in a trial. "You got the packet, didn't you?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. I nodded. "Yeah, and it stinks of fraud." Her eyes lit up. "Good, you see it too." Agnes wasted no time. She scrolled through her phone, showing me a collection that could have belonged to a private investigator. Photos of Alina pacing the street, binder in hand, videos of her snapping pictures of gardens, measuring fences, jotting things down like a detective building a case, and most importantly, screenshots of notices that had been taped to nearly every front door in the neighborhood. They all looked identical. Same language, same formatting errors, even the same typos. And the codes she cited, supposedly Texas housing ordinances. Agnes had cross-checked them, half didn't exist, and the rest were completely misapplied. "This is what she does," Agnes explained. "She swoops in, calls herself the compliance officer, and starts hitting people with fines. The Lopez family remembered them. She hounded them day and night until they moved out in December." I frowned, and people just paid her too many. Agnes said bitterly, "Anywhere from $200 to $500 a month. People gave in because fighting back meant constant harassment. And you've seen what she's done to the houses, beige fences, black mailboxes, those awful white stones. That wasn't choice, it was fear. She bullied people into uniformity. It was a disturbing picture, but it made sense. The binder wasn't just a prop, it was a weapon, enough to look legitimate, scary enough to force compliance. And those keys on her belt? Another intimidation tactic, dangling like shackles in plain sight. By the time Agnes finished showing me her collection of notes, recordings, and photos, I knew this wasn't paranoia. This was a scam, an elaborate con designed to prey on ordinary homeowners who just wanted peace. But the part that struck me hardest was her last comment before heading back home. She paused, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Don't underestimate her. She's smarter than she looks, and she's not afraid to ruin someone to get what she wants." That warning stayed with me, because I had no idea just how far Alina was willing to go or how dangerous her next moves would become. That night, I spread the so-called Willow Creek Standards Guide across my kitchen table like a crime scene file. Every page dripped with authority bold headers, neat columns of fines, even a fake seal that looked official at first glance. But my engineers, I caught flaws most people would miss. Mismatched fonts, inconsistent spacing, and codes that didn't trace back to any real statute. It was a performance. A carefully staged illusion designed to overwhelm, confuse, and intimidate. I sent a quick message to my son Alex, who was on patrol duty that night. Odd neighbor pushing HOA rules. Keys, fines, the works, feels off. His reply was immediate. Sketchy. "Dad, don't engage too much. Document everything." Document that became my mission. I set up a couple of motion-activated cameras. Nothing fancy, just enough to cover the front and back entrances. If Alina tried to pull something, I'd have proof. And those keys she carried? I doubted they worked, but I wasn't going to let her test them without a fight. The following day, I decided to walk the neighborhood myself. It didn't take long to see the pattern Agnes had warned me about. Every house had the same forced look. Beige fences, black mailboxes, white gravel borders. Even gardens were stripped of individuality, reduced to cookie-cutter layouts. I knocked on Tom Bennett's door, a neighbor a few houses down. He hesitated at first, but eventually admitted he'd been paying Alina for months. $17.50 so far, he muttered, eyes darting nervously. She kept saying if I didn't comply, she'd file liens against the property. I can't afford a legal mess. Tom's voice cracked with frustration. She made me rip out my wife's rose bushes, said they didn't fit community standards. It was heartbreaking and infuriating. Alina wasn't just stealing money. She was stripping people of their home's personality, erasing memories one violation at a time. Back at my place, I dug deeper. A quick online search confirmed what I suspected. Willow Creek had no HOA. The city managed basic zoning laws, nothing more. There was no board, no charter, no legal authority behind Alina's claims. But here's the thing about con artists. They thrive on perception, not legality. And Alina had crafted a perception so polished, so intimidating, that people complied rather than risk confrontation. I was determined not to be one of them. That evening, I sat with Agnes on her porch, reviewing her recordings. One stood out, a clip of Alina coaching her handyman, Mike Turner. Say the foundation looks unstable, she told him in a hushed voice. If he pushes back, escalate to safety protocols. Always sound urgent, always sound official. My stomach turned. This wasn't neighborhood upkeep. This was surveillance disguised as inspections. Agnes shook her head. She's been running this act for 8 months. Most people just give in, but you might be the first one stubborn enough to fight her. I wasn't sure if she meant it as a compliment or a warning, but either way, she was right. I wasn't about to let a fake badge and a binder of lies dictate my home. Still, one thing gnawed at me. Alina was bold, organized, and strangely confident. People like that don't bluff forever. If she sensed resistance, she'd escalate. And I had a feeling she wasn't done with me yet. And as it turned out, my instincts were dead on. Because the very next step I took walking into City Hall to check the records would not only prove my suspicions, but also ignite the real battle to come. The morning after reviewing Agnes's recordings, I decided it was time to stop speculating and start confirming. If there really was an HOA running Willow Creek, there would be a paper trail, charters, board filings, something. Con artists thrive on smoke and mirrors, but the truth usually hides in plain sight at City Hall. I walked into the clerk's office with a folder of Elena's paperwork under my arm, the so-called Willow Creek Standards Guide sitting on top. The building smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a place where facts lived on record shelves, not in glossy binders waved around by self-appointed compliance officers. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, glanced at the packet and let out a dry chuckle. "We've been seeing more of these lately," she said, flipping casually through the pages. "Looks official, doesn't it?" "It fooled a lot of my neighbors," I admitted. "But is there actually an HOA here?" She shook her head firmly. "Not in Willow Creek. The city never approved one. This is a non-HOA community, always has been. Your only regulations are basic city codes, things like sidewalk clearance, safety ordinances, that sort of thing. Nothing about mailbox color or fence height." She tapped one page with her finger. "And this seal, total fake. The county doesn't even use this design." The weight lifted off my chest for a moment, confirmation at last that Alina had no authority. But that relief quickly twisted into anger. This woman wasn't just bluffing with empty threats. She was fabricating an entire system of rules and penalties. Preying on the trust of ordinary homeowners, I left City Hall with a certified letter in hand, proof that Willow Creek had no homeowners association on record. I felt like I finally had the smoking gun. Now I could confront her lies head-on, but when I pulled into my driveway, that confidence evaporated. Taped neatly to my front door was another violation notice, written in her familiar, authoritative tone. This one was even more absurd than the last. According to her, my fence exceeded maximum height by 6 inches. The mulch in my garden bed was non-compliant in color, and my mailbox was in the wrong location. The notice demanded $200 due within 48 hours. I stared at the paper, heat rising in my chest. I had just walked out of City Hall with proof that none of this was real, and yet here it was again, plastered on my door as though her word carried more weight than the city itself. In a moment of hesitation, I made what I thought was a small, harmless compromise. I paid her the $250 monthly fee she'd demanded earlier, hoping it would stall her long enough for me to build a stronger case. She accepted it with a smile that told me she thought she'd already won, but hidden in the fine print of her receipt was the real trap. By paying, I had authorized inspection access under her fabricated Article 12. That meant she believed she now had permission to step onto my property, poke around my yard, even open my garage. When she returned 2 days later with her handyman, Mike in tow, clipboard in hand, she acted as though she owned the place. "Payment allows for assessment," she announced. Already moving toward the backyard, I stopped her at the gate, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. But Mike, looking guilty as sin, began measuring fence panels and muttering details into his phone. It wasn't maintenance. It wasn't inspection. It was surveillance, and every word was being fed straight back to Elena's little operation. As I watched him, I realized I hadn't just bought time. I had given her the opening she wanted. She wasn't testing her power anymore. She was preparing to tighten her grip, and the fallout from that single mistake would drag me deeper into her scheme than I ever intended to go. The day I slipped that envelope of cash into Elena's hands, I told myself it was just a temporary move. Buy a little time, avoid immediate conflict, and then hit her with the City Hall evidence I'd gathered. It felt like a clever strategy in the moment, like I was luring her deeper before exposing the scam. But the second she pocketed that money, her entire demeanor shifted. Her smile was no longer smug, it was triumphant. I wasn't just another stubborn homeowner anymore, was her newest paying member. Proof that her system worked. Within a week, things spiraled. A bright yellow slip was taped to my garage door. Unauthorized structure, carport requires approval. Another on my lawn. Overgrowth violation, lawn exceeds 2.5 inches. Each notice carried a fine, and each fine carried the threat of further action if unpaid. At first I laughed them off. I had City Hall's certified letter in my desk drawer. I thought I could wave it in her face and shut her down whenever I wanted. But as the papers piled up, A new problem surfaced, my neighbors. "Why are you ignoring the notices?" asked Mr. Thompson from across the street, a man I'd always considered friendly. "If you don't pay, we all get dragged down," she told. U.S. non-compliance affects the entire community. I froze. Alina wasn't just targeting me, she was turning my neighbors against me. By painting me as the rebel, she shifted the pressure. If I refused to pay, I wasn't just defying her, I was hurting the neighborhood. Soon whispers followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, I caught side glances. At church, someone muttered about that guy with the violations. She had poisoned the well, and the more I resisted, the more isolated I became. And then came the scare tactics. One evening, as I watered the garden, I noticed Mike's pickup parked down the street. He wasn't fixing anyone's house, he was just sitting there, staring at mine. His phone was raised as if he were taking pictures. The next morning, a notice accused me of unauthorized modifications to exterior lighting. Coincidence? Not a chance. He was documenting everything, feeding her so-called compliance reports. By then, I had racked up over $1,500 in bogus fines. Elena's letters grew bolder, now mentioning escalation to legal action. And though I knew it was bluff, a small part of me worried. What if the neighbors sided with her? What if she actually filed something in small claims court and confused a judge with her stack of fake documents? The stress began eating at me. I slept less, checked the windows constantly, and snapped at family when they tried to reassure me. Even Agnes, who had stood strong before, whispered that maybe paying was easier than fighting. That's when I realized the true cost of my mistake. It wasn't the money, it was the power shift. By handing over that first payment, I had legitimized her scam. I had confirmed her role as authority, not just in her eyes, but in the eyes of everyone watching. The walls were closing in. My neighbors doubted me. My bank account bled under fraudulent fines. And Alina strutted around the cul-de-sac like a queen who had finally subdued the last rebel. I knew I had to act before she cemented her control completely. But I couldn't do it alone anymore. What I didn't know then was that help was closer than I thought, and it would come from a place Alina could never have anticipated. By the second week of Alina's so-called compliance blitz, I knew two things with absolute certainty. One, if I didn't stop her, my retirement savings would vanish into her pockets like they had for so many others. And two, fighting her alone was a losing game. That's when I decided to turn outward. If Alina wanted to play Queen of Willow Creek, she was about to find out the peasants had pitchforks. My first stop was Agnes. She opened her door before I even knocked, holding her phone like a loaded weapon. "You've been getting the notices, haven't you?" she said flatly. I nodded. "She's bleeding me dry, but you've got the proof." "We need to use it," Agnes sighed, leading me inside. Her dining room table was a war room, photos pinned, 2 corkboards, time-stamped videos organized in folders, every citation Alina had ever handed out cataloged. She had been documenting since the day Alina showed up. Convinced something was off. "This isn't just you," she whispered, pushing a stack of papers toward me. "She targeted Mrs. Lopez before you. Drove her out by December, same script, inspections, rumors. I think she planned to do the same with you." That was the first time I realized I wasn't just a victim, I was part of a pattern. Later that evening, I knocked on Tom Bennett's door. Tom was quiet, a man who kept to himself, but his eyes darted nervously when I mentioned Alina. "Got me for almost $2,000, he admitted. Said my mailbox wasn't regulation height. My shed wasn't painted the right shade. I didn't want the trouble, so I paid every time I thought I was done. Another notice came. When I told him there was no HOA charter, no county filings, his jaw tightened. "You're serious?" I slid the certified letter from City Hall across his counter. Tom read it twice, 3 times, before exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for months, that which has been stealing from all of us. We weren't just neighbors anymore, we were co-conspirators. But not everyone was easy to sway. Linda Hayes, the so-called community cheerleader, had bought into a promises hook, line, and sinker. "She's raising our property values," Linda insisted when I approached her. "You think uniformity happens by accident. You're just bitter because you don't want to keep up." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because I saw the fear behind them. Linda wasn't defending Alina out of loyalty, she was terrified of what known compliance might bring. Still, I knew if we could expose the scam publicly, even Linda would have to choose between pride and truth. That night, in my living room, the resistance was born. Just 3 of us, May, Agnes, and Tom, hunched over a laptop, reviewing footage and cross-checking fake citations. Agnes played a recording of Alina coaching her handyman, Mike, on how to spot violations. It was chilling. "She's not just enforcing rules," Agnes said. "She's collecting intelligence. Foundation cracks, panel gaps, backyard layouts. She's gathering property details." I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't about tidy lawns, it was about leverage. We drafted a plan, document every incident, pool our evidence, and prepare to confront her in front of the whole neighborhood. If Alina thrived on fear and isolation, we would break her hold, with solidarity and exposure. And for the first time since she arrived, I didn't feel alone. When I went to bed that night, I glanced at the security camera feed. Elena's car rolled slowly past my driveway, her silhouette barely visible behind the wheel. But instead of dread, a new thought stirred in me. She's watching. Good let her, because this time, I wasn't the only one watching back. The resistance grew quietly, like a flame catching dry leaves. Agnes and Tom were with me, and a few others started whispering doubts too. But Elena wasn't stupid, she sensed the shift. And when someone like her feels power slipping, they don't back down, they double down. It started with the notices. Instead of 1 or 2 taped to my door, I woke up to find half a dozen plastered across my fence, mailbox, even my garage. Bright red letters screamed words like urgent and final warning. The language escalated, no more friendly reminders, but threats of emergency procedures if I didn't comply. I called the city clerk again, just to steady my nerves. The same answer. Sir, there is absolutely no HOA in Willow Creek. These documents are fraudulent. I knew it, but the weight of those words on paper, shoved in my face daily, still gnawed at me. And Elena was no longer limiting her attacks to notices. That Friday, as I walked to get the mail, I overheard Linda Hayes and 2 others whispering by the curb. The moment they saw me, they went silent. Later, Agnes confirmed my suspicion. Elena had been spreading rumors. She's telling people you're confused, that you're slipping since your wife passed. It hit me like a gut punch. I wasn't just fighting fines anymore. She was targeting my reputation, framing me as a senile old man who didn't know what he was talking about. And if my neighbors believed it, how long before they stopped trusting the evidence I was gathering? By Sunday, Elena escalated further. Mike, her so-called handyman, showed up with a tape measure and clipboard. I stepped onto my porch. What do you think you're doing? I demanded. Assessment, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. Payment authorized inspection. Article 12. Article 12. The fine print I'd overlooked on that receipt when I handed her the first $250. By paying, I had unknowingly consented to property access. Mike moved from my fence to the side gate, jotting notes like a building inspector. I followed him, fury building in my chest. You're trespassing, I snapped. He looked at me with guilt, then whispered under his breath, I'm sorry, man, she makes me do it. That's when I realized something chilling. Mike wasn't just recording fence heights. He was cataloging vulnerabilities. Every crack, every weak spot. This wasn't about compliance at all, it was surveillance. That night, Elena called me directly. Her voice was honeyed but laced with menace. Mr. Harlan, I'm concerned about your well-being. Age. Confusion after retirement is common. Perhaps your son should be involved in these matters. We wouldn't want you to make poor decisions for the community. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. She wasn't just attacking me, she was trying to paint me as incompetent, unstable, even incapable of managing my own home. If she could convince the neighborhood I was losing it, my fight was already lost. The next day, another ultimatum arrived. 48 hours to resolve violations or face emergency procedures. No explanation, just bold text and a deadline. I showed it to Agnes. She raised an eyebrow. Emergency procedures. That's not HOA language, that's intimidation. And she was right. This wasn't about order or property values anymore. Elena had shifted into full-blown psychological warfare. By then, the stress was unbearable. Neighbors avoided me. My garden, the one I planted for my late wife, felt like a battlefield. Every camera notification on my phone made my heart jump. I slept in bursts, waking at the sound of phantom footsteps. But in the middle of that chaos, a line hardened in me. Enough was enough. She could smear me, fine me, even try to break me down, but she would not step foot in my home. And when she tried, I'd be ready. By Tuesday afternoon, the entire neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest. Flyers plastered to mailboxes reminded everyone of Elena's so-called master inspection at 7 p.m. sharp. Some neighbors treated it like a showdown, gathering in small clusters outside, whispering nervously. Others locked their doors, too, afraid to get involved. I, on the other hand, was done being afraid. My cameras were charged, my documents laid out, and my phone set with the local police on speed dial. My son, Alex, an officer himself, knew what was happening. His last message was clear: document everything. Call it in the moment she crosses the line. As the clock ticked toward 7, I sat by the window, heart hammering like a drum. At 6:45, she appeared. Elena Vargas, heels clicking, clipboard in hand, keys jingling like weapons on her belt. Behind her trailed Mike, face pale, eyes downcast. And behind them, half the neighborhood followed like spectators to an execution. She stopped at my gate, raised her voice for all to hear, and declared, "Emergency inspection. Article 12 authority. Access is mandatory." I opened my door, camera rolling. "This is private property," I said, voice steady. "There is no HOA. Any attempt to enter is criminal trespass." Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. She pulled out the keys and began trying them, one by one, shoving them into the lock like she had the right to be there. None fit. Each failed turn made her hands shake a little harder. By the 8th key, the crowd began to murmur. Agnes called out, "Those keys never worked." She's been bluffing all along. Tom shouted next. I paid you almost $2,000 for nothing. The illusion crumbled. Elena's composure snapped. She tossed the keys onto the lawn and slammed her clipboard against the door. This house is illegally modified, she screamed. You've endangered the community. Chaos erupted. Neighbors shouted accusations, demanding refunds, demanding answers. Papers flew as Elena's binder slipped from her hands, scattering fake citations. Across the driveway, Mike stepped back, shaking his head, muttering, I'm done. But Elena wasn't finished. She yanked out her phone and dialed. In front of everyone, she shouted into the receiver, Help! I'm under attack. An unstable elderly man is threatening me. Send officers now. The crowd gasped. I held up my phone, recording the entire thing. Every word you're saying is on camera, I told her. This is fraud. This is harassment. She dropped the phone, rage boiling over. She lunged at my door with a rake sheet, grabbed from the side of the porch, jamming it against the lock, prying like a burglar. That was her final mistake. Sirens wailed in the distance. Tires screeched. And then, from the corner, a familiar voice cut through the night. Step away. From the door. Ma'am, my son Alex, in full uniform, strode up the walkway. The crowd froze, stunned. Elena's face strained of color as she realized the man she'd tried to smear as a confused old man was the father of the officer now standing before her. Dad, you okay? Alex asked, eyes locked on Elena. Relief flooded me. Better now, Elena stammered. Officer, I'm the director here. This is all a conspiracy against me. But Alex didn't waver. You're under arrest for trespassing, false reporting, and attempted burglary. Put the rake down. She dropped it with a clatter, her mask on, her voice breaking into a desperate scream as backup officers cuffed her. The neighborhood stood in stunned silence. For the first time in months, the fear lifted. The scam was over. The night Elena was led away in handcuffs, the entire neighborhood stood frozen. For months, she had ruled with fear, polished lies, and intimidation. And now, in the glow of red and blue lights, that empire of deception had crumbled. The following weeks revealed the full scale of her scheme. Investigators traced over $27,000 siphoned from Willow Creek residents, with similar scams uncovered in nearby communities. $18,000 here, $12,000 there. She had perfected the art of looking official, preying on vulnerability, and using intimidation to keep people silent. But silence was broken. Neighbors who had once avoided me now came by with apologies, casseroles, and stories. Tom admitted he'd felt trapped for months. Linda, though embarrassed, finally confessed that Elena had promised her a leadership role in the board if she stayed loyal. Even Mike, the handyman, provided testimony. He revealed scripts Elena had written for staging emergency procedures, which included calling 911 to falsely label resistant homeowners as mentally unstable. The court didn't take kindly to her methods. Elena was sentenced to probation, restitution of $35,000, community service, and a short jail term. More importantly, she was banned from ever managing or enforcing neighborhood associations again. But beyond the legal victory, something else happened. Willow Creek began to heal. Where once we had rows of matching beige fences and sterile mailboxes, people started reclaiming their individuality. One neighbor painted their fence bright blue. Another planted a wildflower garden where Elena once demanded uniform stones. My garden dedicated to my late wife became the unofficial hub. People brought chairs, kids ran through and the smell of barbecue replaced the stench of fear. We didn't need an HOA to create beauty. We needed trust. We needed freedom. Looking back, I realized Elena's greatest weapon had never been her fake documents or jingling keys. It was division. She thrived by isolating people, making them believe they stood alone. But once we compared notes, once we shared evidence, her power collapsed overnight. It taught me a hard but lasting truth. Communities are strongest when neighbors look out for one another, not when they bow to bullies. Every now and then, I still think about the night she tried to pry open my lock with a rake. Neighbors watching, police sirens closing in. I remember the look on her face when Alex stepped forward, revealing the truth she never saw coming. And I smile, not because she was arrested, not because restitution was ordered, but because, in the end, the very thing she tried to exploit community was the thing that defeated her. Willow Creek no longer lives under the shadow of a fake enforcer. We live as neighbors, friends, and in many ways, family. We learned that sometimes ordinary resistance, just saying no, and standing firm, can topple the most domineering of tyrants. And whenever I sit in my garden, sprinklers humming, flowers blooming, I remember my wife. I like to think she would have smiled at the fight, at the stubbornness, at the refusal to bend to fear, because real order, real beauty, and real strength don't come from manufactured rules or forged papers. They come from people willing to stand together, even when it's hard. In the end, the garden grew, and so did we.